Now that you've practiced simplifying radicals, we're going to look at another scenario, and that's when you have a negative number under a radical. You can graph radicals that have something negative underneath, but when you try to do it in the calculator, you get an error message. So if I were to do the square root of -1, it says domain error, and that will happen anytime you put a negative number under a radical. But you can graph it and see a graph. So we can't algebraically get a solution. And that's because those solutions are what's called imaginary. They're imaginary numbers. So anytime you have something negative, it means your solution is going to have an imaginary number. We show this with the letter I. So I is not a variable like X. I stands for imaginary. And anytime we see a negative in a radical, it means it's I. So let's take a look at this problem 25 right here, where it says the square root of -1 times the square root of 16 times the square root of 2. So as I just told you, the square root of -1 is I, so I'm going to write an I. The square root of 16 is 4, and then the radical 2 can't come out of the square root sign. It's going to stay like this. So the way we write this whole answer, do you want to actually write this number in front of the I? We would have 4 radical I square root 2. I'm going to show you another example here. So in this next problem, we also have a -1, square root of 225, and square root of 21. So I know that the square root of -1 is I. When I look on my bookmark, I see that the square root of 225 is plus and minus 15. So I'm going to put that in the front. When I forgot my plus and minus there. And then that 21 is going to stay in the radical. It's not a perfect square. It needs to stay in there. So again, the I came from the -1, and the plus minus 15 is the square root of 225. Why don't you give this one a try? You're going to have the square root of -1. So that'll be your I. The square root of 81 is plus and minus 9. And then that 3 stays in the radical because there's no square root of 3 in your bookmark. All right, I'm going to do numbers 25 and 26 here. This is going to be a full problem. So the first thing we want to do is break it up the way we did on the top. So I'm going to do the square root. I'm going to take out that -1. And I have the square root of 196. Well, 196 is actually a perfect square. It's plus and minus 14. So I'm going to have my I for the -1 and plus minus 14 in the front. That was an easy one. Whenever you have a perfect square, you don't have to break it up because the largest orange number that can divide into 196 is actually 196. So let's look at this one right here, 432. So I'm going to break this up. I've got the square root of -1, and then I need to find the largest perfect square that I can divide into 432. So I'm going to just work my way down my list. I'm going to do 432 divided by 225. That doesn't work. I'm going to try 144. Ooh, that worked. When I divided by 144, I got 3. So I'm going to have the square root of 144 and the square root of 3. So now I can finish this. The square root of -1 is I. The square root of 144 is on my bookmark. It's plus and minus 12. And then the 3 will stay in the radical. Why don't you give number 27 a try?